Hi, I'm Miss Amber, and I'm here with your English 11B live lesson. Now, this should be a quick one today. We're working on the first lesson of Unit 2. Unit 1 was really long for this class, and this one's a little shorter than some of the ones we've been going over the last couple weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just get started. Move myself up here real quick. Alrighty, so this lesson is called Themes Across Genres. So they just want to give you information about different themes, how they can show up through books, and they want to give you a list of different types of genres and how they've developed over time. So they talk to you at first about what themes are. So the theme is the central idea of an artistic work. So they talk about themes and they give you an example of one: discovery, finding something new, realizing something new about yourself. That's a theme. Now, they give you an example. William Bradford builds on the theme of discovery in his non-fictional work of On Plymouth Plantation, and Robert Frost explores the theme discovery in his poem, The Road Not Taken. Now, just as a reminder, people often mix up subject and theme. So the subject of a poem or a book or any type of work is the literal subject, what it is about. If someone asks you, what is this book about? So generally, what's happening in it? That one sentence description that you can give them, that's the subject. A theme is a bigger idea, something philosophical. It's like think something deep that everyone can sort of relate to in a different way. So discovery is a really good example of that. Discovery means to find something new, and people can find something new in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to happen the same way. If we were talking about the subject, for example, of The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, the subject is deciding which road to take on a walking trail. That's basically what happens in that poem. What makes the theme discovery is that the road is actually a metaphor for the choices that we make in life. And Robert Frost specifically talks about why it might be worthwhile to take a path that hasn't been explored before on the trail. So they give you other examples here. Certain themes such as discovery, love, life, and death have captivated writers and readers across generations and cultures. And these themes remain relevant to humans no matter what time period. And that's a good sign that you have a theme on your hands instead of a subject. Not everyone can relate to, for example, Harry Potter. A young boy finds out that he can do magic and that he's a wizard. Not everyone finds that interesting. Not everyone can relate to that. Some people can dig deep and say, oh man, if I was, like an orphan that just discovered I could do magic, here are things I have in common with this person. But you kind of have to dig deep to get into the how and why someone could identify with that. When you're dealing with the theme, it should be easy for a person to say, like, oh, well, in what way does this happen? Oh, I can relate to this, even though it's not exactly the same as what's in the book. When you're discovering something new, we all have those experiences. We all decide to look into um, themes that we identify with. We all decide to look into finding something new for discovery. So that works as a theme. Love, most people experience love or experience a lack of love that makes them aware of what love is and that they don't have it. We all live and die, that kind of thing. So those are good examples and ideas for genres. Now it says a literary work may or may not be bound by a specific genre. Often, a single work can be a blend of genres. For example, William Thackeray's novel Vanity Fair is a blend of historical fiction and satire, and William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet is both a romance and a tragedy. So, genres are basically the categories that we can put different types of writings in, the types of themes that are in a book. So we take a look at some of the literary genres and subgenres. So there are two major genres for things that are written. Technically, there are three, but we'll get into that a little later. The first of the two big ones is nonfiction. Nonfiction is basically only when you write about factual events, and then they give you some examples of this. A biography is a story of a person's life written by someone else. Not to be confused with the next one, which is an autobiography. Auto means doing it to yourself. So an autobiography is the story of a person's life that's written by the person who is being featured in the book. So if you write a book about your life so far, that is an autobiography. People often mix up autobiographies and memoirs, but a memoir although it has memories of certain things in it, a memoir is usually selecting specific memories to connect like an overall idea, point, or theme. An autobiography would be you writing about your entire life from beginning up to where you are now. Persuasive writing. So like when we ask you to write a paper convincing us of something, prove that recycling it helps the environment, prove that this story takes a look at what a tragedy is, or when you write about pretty much convincing anyone of anything. If you want to convince someone, for example, that being on your smartphone all the time is bad, you can try to look up statistics, actual information, studies on how that affects people, and then make an argument for or against. And then the last one is information or technical writing. Information or technical writing gives you very specific information about a topic that's predefined. So for example, when you go to visit like Yellowstone National Park, when you go to visit a landmark and you're reading the plaque or you pick up a brochure that has information about it, when you stop at a museum and you read a couple paragraphs about some piece of pottery that someone made 1,500 years ago, that's informational writing. Technical writing is a little different. That's usually manuals and instructions. So if you're explaining to someone how to fix a bike and you give them step-by-step instructions, that's technical writing. Informational is just giving information. Technical writing is usually giving someone instructions or information about something that has to do with like work or technical work. The second big category is fiction. Fiction is the other major literary genre, which includes imaginative works that are not factual, but can be inspired by factual or historical events. So then they go over some of those genres. And I know that you've heard of a lot of these. We're going to start from the bottom and move up. So we're starting with folklore. So that's basically really old oral stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. So when we tell stories, they give you the example Cinderella. These are really old stories that used to be told orally as a performance that eventually got written down and are reinterpreted over and over again over time. When we talk about Aesop's fables, like the tortoise and the hare, or there's like another fable about a crow that needs to get some water out of a jar. So he drops stones into the water to displace it and push it up to the top so he can drink some. And the point of the story is to talk about like wisdom and hard work, because it takes time to get the stones to put them in the jar to get the water to push up. But he's eventually successful. Those kinds of things are folklore. Usually these are really old stories that have been told over and over again. Hansel and Gretel, for example, is one of those. Most of the movies that Disney makes are based on folk tales, for example. So we have horror. Horror is the next one from the bottom. Involves fictional writing that aims to evoke terror and shock in readers. So they give you the example of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The goal is to give you that sort of exciting fight or flight, exciting, I'm definitely alive because I'm too excited sort of feeling. So we have fantasy. Fantasy is the next one. It involves fictional settings. So that's basically made up settings. Supernatural occurrences. So that's like magic or sometimes magic mixed with science that's off the rails. And of course, they give you Harry Potter as an example and Lord of the Rings. Those are the two biggest ones. We have lots of elves, dwarves, magic, magic swords, dragons, all those kind of things. Next is science fiction. So usually science fiction is about um, an imaginative depiction of like advanced technology, aliens, and futuristic concepts. So just imagining what the future would be like and the sort of technology that's there. The difference between science fiction and fantasy is that science fiction actually tries to explain, or at least pretends to explain, the technology that's there. Often with fantasy, it's just kind of like, well, someone has the power to do this, so they made it happen. Science fiction is usually, well, here's the technology that was used to help make this happen. We used this technology that you have available today and developed it to the point where it can do blank. So time travel is an example of that. Realistic fiction is basically when you write a story about someone who's made up in a time that's made up, but it's something that could have happened in real life. So when you're reading stories about like people who like have a dream to be a doctor or have a dream to run their own business and stuff like that, that can be realistic fiction. When you have a story about like a kid that works hard to basically become like a good person, reach a dream of theirs in terms of owning something or doing something. If it's something that a person can do in real life, but you're not basing it on something that you know happened, then it's fiction. There's realistic fiction for children. They write them about like, oh, well, I got a new pet, or I, went to the zoo and stuff like that. These aren't things that happen to a literal real person, but they made up a story about something that happens every day that could happen, but it just happened to someone imaginary. And then the last one is historical fiction. Historical fiction is fictitious characters. So fictitious means they're fictional characters in a historical setting. So you take people that you made up and put them in a very real time in history and kind of go, well, what if this happened? That's what historical fiction is. And they give you the Count of Monte Cristo as an example. A popular example that people can think of today is The Handmaid's Tale. That's pretty popular right now. That's basically historical fiction. Okay, it says, while fiction can be categorized into subgenres by the subject of the work, like romance, horror, or science fiction, it can also be characterized by the type of literary work. So these are the other genres, sort of things that I was talking about before. Now there's prose. Prose is basically anything that's written in normal form to tell a story. So you've got paragraphs, and there are things that are in science fiction or horror or romance that are prose. Most things that you read are prose. Those are regular paragraph structures, sentences, quotes, things like that. Most nonfiction is also written in prose because it's normal writing. Poetry usually has a distinctive poetic form. So you've got line breaks everywhere. There's usually rhyme structure. There's like a pattern with the words. They rhyme at the end and stuff like that. We know what poetry looks like, but it's its own subcategory because not everything that's written is poetry. And then the last is drama. This is a thing that we normally forget about. Drama is when you write a work that's meant to be on stage, performed on stage. It has stage lines, dialogue, and you're usually acting out different scenes and sections. And they give you examples. William Shakespeare's Macbeth, but we also mentioned Romeo and Juliet earlier, so that's definitely one. There are lots of different types of plays, and there are modern ones too. Rent is a play that counts as drama. Drama is just a fancy word for plays because it is a dramatic acting out of a story. Now they give you a little more detail here about drama because that's the one that's normally forgotten about. And they just explain why it's important to have stage directions with drama. And they give you an example here. This is the dialogue line, Sheila's name in a script. Why don't you come with me? And then they add a stage direction excitedly while jumping up and down, just so that you know why it's important to include stage directions in drama and why that makes things different than writing prose or poetry. You can't just take a normal book like Harry Potter and converted into being a play without making these sort of changes to how it's formatted. So they just want you to know the difference. Okay, so now we've got some reading selections here. We have Ambush by Tim O'Brien. And this slide gives you some information about his life and his background as a vet from the Vietnam War. And just in general, they let you know he was born in 1946. He was definitely very opposed to the Vietnam War after he came back. And his most influential work was the things they carried. He's very famous for writing about war, about soldiers' experiences, and that's what his works center around. So Ambush is definitely about that. So here they give you a little summary of Ambush. It basically talks about how difficult it is to answer questions about war. It starts off with his daughter asking if he's killed anyone. And he has a hard time with answering his daughter honestly, especially because his daughter is young. She's not going to understand the weight of what he's done and the actual truth. So basically, it's about the internal conflict that he has trying to decide if he wants to tell his daughter the honest answer to her question. And he also struggles with just knowing that he has killed people himself during the war. So the internal conflict of him being honest with his daughter turns into the internal conflict of him struggling with his own memories. The second reading we have for this is John Steinbeck. I just want to remind you that this lesson is about theme and genre, right? So there's not a whole lot of information to give you. There's no history to, give you background on here. These are pretty straightforward readings. If you're having trouble, of course, you can sign up for a tutoring session, but these are all pretty straightforward, and this isn't a super long lesson. Now, the second excerpt is Symptoms by John Steinbeck. Now, he also participated in the war effort and saw a lot of things up close, especially because he wrote wartime newspaper things, articles about war. So he got to go out and see stuff. One of his most famous works is Grapes of Wrath. And he participated in the war effort through his writing. He tried to write things that were patriotic so that people wouldn't have a rough time with supporting war in their country. Now on slide 17, we get to an analysis of symptoms. Just as a reminder for anyone new, I don't go over the excerpts line by line, one, because it would take entirely too long. And two, it's important for you guys to read your excerpts so that you can go through the analysis and understand what's going on. Sometimes it's easier to read the analysis when you can before you read the actual work. But it's still important for you to go back on your own and try to grasp that these are not, these live lessons are not here just to stop you from having to do any work at all. So here on slide 17, we get into the analysis. I'm not going to go through the entire thing because they give you some excerpts from the actual work, but I will read the first paragraph about how this story starts. It begins with how difficult it is for soldiers to discuss their war experiences. And that ends up being what the analysis is about. That's pretty much the entire thing. And I'll leave the conclusion that he comes up with at the end to you. But the essay and the piece is about how soldiers have a difficult time talking about their war experiences. The way that he writes it, they go over on slide 18. He writes it as if it's a newspaper column and it's supposed to represent the public. He writes it from the perspective of someone who hasn't had any war-related experiences, speaking straightforward about war to people who have actually been there. The language that he uses makes it seem like the writer is clueless about how difficult war can be at first. And through writing the article, informs the readers and the person like the person writing the article becomes more and more aware of how difficult it probably is for people to talk about that. He uses an analogy to discuss the similarities between war and childbirth. Childbirth is something that most people haven't experienced, but people know that it's difficult. So it's easy for him to talk about how similar it is to war, because it's a powerful and traumatic event that some people have experienced, but not everybody. It says down here, he compares different aspects of those two events, the war and childbirth. So specifically, he discusses pain and the body's ability to forget the events that occurred. And by comparing it to war to childbirth, he is able to make it more personal and relatable to how people think about it. Most people don't think about wartime or actually being out there. It's just not possible for them to conceive how difficult it is. But there are videos of people giving childbirth. You can actually watch it happening and imagine how difficult it is. Are they the same? No, but they are similar in how people perceive them, how they are expressed. So by bringing them together with the analogy, he ends up creating the idea of war in a sympathetic way that people can understand. The next activity is going to have you compare those two excerpts, ambush and symptoms. And the last section is on language. Now, this is about giving presentations. It's pretty easy. It's pretty much just about being able to choose the appropriate language based on your audience. So this whole slide basically talks about how, depending on who you are talking to and who you're giving your speech to or your presentation when you are writing one, it will affect the tone and word choice. If you're talking to your friends, you're going to use different language than if you're talking to your teacher or your doctor, right? So those people would be your audience. If you're giving a speech or a presentation to people who are professional, who are deciding something important, you're going to want to choose more formal words. You want it to sound polished and sophisticated. If you're just talking to your friends or your classmates, you might use something or language that's more informal. This slide just wants you to think about who the things that you're writing are directed towards. And you can use this for essays in this class, essays for college and things like that. It's just important to look at the words that you're using. If you're writing an essay, say you're applying for college, right? What you want to do is take a look at what you are saying, look in at the source and see, is there a better word for what I'm trying to say? Does this sound professional? Different ways that you can help yourself do that kind of correction. You can read your essay or send it to someone you trust to give you some feedback. You can also read it out loud to yourself and say, how does this sound? Is this how I would normally talk to someone that I know? Is this language that would I hire someone if they sent something to me like this? Or would I let someone in if they sent something to me like this? You can also look up lots of resources online, examples to give you a jumping off point. It's just important to consider what you're trying to say and who you're saying it to when you choose the words that you use. That's about it. I'm gonna stop sharing now. This was a pretty short lesson today. So basically, theme across genres is just about the different types of themes, different types of genres. Is pretty much a list and just some examples. If you did have any issues with the excerpts though, or the reading selections, please contact your mentor or your advocate for tutoring. I think that's about it for today. This was a short one. Alrighty, so this is Miss Amber signing off, and good luck with your English class.